From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, shared death experiences. Here's what's happening. Very sad story tonight. Singer Lisa Marie Presley, the only child of Elvis and Priscilla Presley, has died. She was 54 years old. She had a heart attack. An American Navy veteran who has been detained in Russia for nearly a year was released from Russian custody after months of negotiations spearheaded by former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. Taylor Dudley, 35-year-old of Lansing, Michigan, was detained by Russian Border Patrol police in April of 2022 after crossing from Poland into Kaliningrad, a Russian enclave which is territory governed by Moscow between Poland and Lithuania. He was in Poland attending a music festival, and it's not clear why he crossed the border. His detention, which the U.S. government had not deemed as wrongful or based on arbitrary or discriminatory motivations, had not been previously publicized. Inflation closed out 2022 in a modest retreat, with consumer prices in December posting their biggest monthly decline since early in the pandemic, according to the Labor Department. As we reported last night, a little bit of kindness shown toward others can help beat the feelings of depression and anxiety with the person expressing the kindness. That, according to a new study from Ohio State University. Scientists report that performing good deeds leads to notable mental health improvements not seen in two other therapeutic techniques commonly used to treat the conditions. Who better to answer that story but Christian Wilde from myheartbook.com. So you do good deeds, you feel better, Christian?
Absolutely. You do a little kindness and appreciate the kindness. There's no doubt about it, George. The country as a whole, financially, is having a tough time.
Sure.
Families are out of work, losing their homes, and if the government is unable or unwilling to help them, where can they turn except to the rest of us to show a little kindness? There was a time when our pop music reflected more the mood of the country. I know you remember that great Simon and Garfunkel song, and I'm on your side, and when things get rough and friends just can't be found, I'll be your bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down. Or another song that used the first words ever spoken on earth when the brother was asked, "Where is your brother?" And the answer was, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Maybe we are.
Maybe we are indeed. And I want to get your reaction to the very sad story of Lisa Marie Presley, 54 years old.
Too young, George, and what a life. Can you imagine that little girl walking into her first school days or high school and people staring at her and talking? She had no privacy. She was under great stress, I'm sure. And we know that stress is one of the major factors in heart attacks and heart disease.
She was at the Golden Globes a few days ago and did not look well at all.
Yeah, and they said she had some pains in her stomach, I believe, in the morning. And the Presley family has a long history of heart disease.
Well, that's what killed Elvis. Thanks, Christian. Christian's website, myheartbook.com. A highly anticipated report on the Pentagon's efforts to study UFOs has been released to us. And sadly, it seems that the phenomenon remains as mysterious as ever. With more on UFOs, here's our friend Kevin Randall back with us. Kevin, what do we have today?
Well, good evening, George.
Hi there.
In the breaking news you just mentioned, we learned that the required annual report on UAPs dropped today. It's only 11 pages, with many of those 11 pages only partially filled. The executive summary is 4 paragraphs telling us that they added to the 144 reports gathered over the last 17 years were 247 new reports, with another 119 that were either discovered or reported after the preliminary assessment period, for a total of 510 reports as of August 30th of last year. AARO began their robust analytic process of 366 newly identified reports that left 171 that were said to be uncharacteristic and unattributed UAP reports, which is a way of saying that they were unidentified at the moment. Of those 366 reports, 26 were unmanned aircraft or UAVs. 163 were balloons or balloon-like entities, which is their words and not mine. And 6 were clutter, meaning birds or weather or other such things. In the summary, they noted that the UAP continued to represent a hazard to flight safety and pose a possible adversary collection threat. Aero has been established as the DoD focal point for UAP reports, and coordinated efforts among various government agencies have resulted in increased data sets. However, we have no details on the reports, what investigative methods were used, and that the numbers were often repeated. They reported the 510 reports. They mentioned 366 reports that were gathered in addition and 119 reports that were not included in the assessment period. There are 3 appendices that included key terms, the Aero Establishment Office and duties, and telling us that an annual report is due on October 31st of each year until 2026. In other words, there wasn't much in the report that provided any insight to what was happening or how the investigations were conducted, the size of the operation, or any description of the UFO sightings made, just numbers reported and governmental boilerplate that clarified nothing. And as I mentioned, the next scheduled report is on October 31st, and I'll post a link to the report on my blog. Last week, several magazines and news sources reported that the Russians had said they shot down a UFO. The Rostov Oblast governor, Vasily Golyubev, said a small ball-shaped object that was flying at about 8,000 feet had been shot down. Although it had been described as a UFO, I suspect, given the location near the Ukrainian border and the military activity in the area, that it was a drone as opposed to an alien spacecraft. Some sources pointed out that there had been other UFO sightings in the area, but that doesn't help us determine the nature of the object that was shot down. And even with this emphasis on these older reports, there was a very interesting sighting made recently. On August 18th of last year, a retired Marine fighter pilot, Mark Hulsey, while flying a Gulfstream private jet at high altitude, reported 2 UFOs between 5,000 and 10,000 feet above him. He watched the UFOs for about 20 minutes and called the Los Angeles Air Traffic Control Center, asking if they had any radar contact with the UFOs, but was told they had nothing in the vicinity. Hulsey said the traffic collision avoidance system in his aircraft set to the above mode registered nothing. Hulsey said that while he was in communication with the L.A. Center, 2 UFOs were joined by 2 others. He also saw what he called a shooting star join the formation, making a total of 5. All the UFOs were in a circular orbit, and he lost sight of them after about 20 minutes. And here's what's important about his report. Hulsey said there was an agency set up after 9/11 that apparently has an interest in UFOs, and that is in addition to the new agencies I just mentioned. Hulsey's report, tapes, and other documentation was forwarded for a new study to that agency. And that's what we have for tonight, George.
All right, my friend, thank you for the update. That's Kevin Randall, who appears with us weekly, giving us updated UFO reports. In a moment, Tom T. Moore back with us. He, of course, will be talking about the Earth Experiment next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Tom T. Moore back with us, has been president and CEO of his own international motion picture and TV program distribution business for at least 24-plus years. During this time, he has co-executive produced several movies and TV shows and has traveled extensively as part of the business duties. He's an author as well. Mr. Moore graduated with a B.A. in Business Administration from Texas Christian University, served in the U.S. Army as a first lieutenant. Thank you, Tom. And he has been requesting benevolent outcomes for 10 years and has a very keen knowledge of how they can be used in both business affairs and in one's personal life, resulting in what he calls the gentle way. Tom, welcome back. How have you been?
Great. Thanks for having me, George.
Looking forward to
this.
this.
To everyone.
And your books are great. First Contact, Atlantis and Lemuria, The Gentle Way with Pets. We'll talk about everything today. But what is the Earth Experiment? What is that?
The Earth Experiment came about because the creator of this universe, and there's trillions of creators and trillions of universes, wanted to see if the 4 negative energies that exist, that no one in any of these universes had ever been able to work with, could be worked with. And so he, she, however you want to term it, created the Earth Experiment, and it is only in our solar system. It only is the Earth and our solar system. Once you get out past the Oort belt, then you get back into the 10 positive energies that the rest of the universe operates on. So that's how it started. The Creator sent its emissaries to these planets, these ET planets, and said, "This is what I want to do, and so I want you to start developing a body that could work within these 4 negative energies." And so they knew how to create bodies, but they didn't really have practical experience. And so they started with like the Lucy and the Littlefoot bodies, worked up through the Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons, and finally, 60,000 years ago, they came up with the Homo sapiens.
How much of an impact have they had on us? Probably a lot, huh?
Oh yeah, they've been around us for literally millions of years. That's why you were having all the information about the UFOs. That's going to increase, I'm told, in the next 6 months, to the point where I'm told that by my contact, Antura, he said, have your readers keep their cell phones at hand, Tom, because they're going to start seeing some UFOs really close.
I love that. And do you think eventually governments will really begin to tell us, Tom, what the heck is going on?
Well, with a little help from us, I think. I've also been in contact with a Pleiadian, and this Pleiadian has a group of 3 or 4 of them, and they meet with 6 countries on a monthly basis. And these are like scientific types, and they're wanting to back engineer these crashed UFOs and all. And they all think that they're the only ones these Pleiadians are talking to, but in actuality, the Pleiadian makes sure that nobody gets ahead of anyone else. They're all on a level playing field.
Now, when you say you're in contact with a Pleiadian, how did that happen?
Through Antura. Antura is a member of my soul group, and he is an amphibian, and he was born on Nomo, a water planet in the Sirius B star system. And right now, he and his 3 grassroots first contact team are on a Sirian mothership that's 3 miles wide and 20 stories tall.
Wow!
With 11 decks, crew of 900, plus their families. That because they live their whole lives on board the ship, and this is the very same ship that went over Phoenix and was known as the Phoenix Lights. So it's shaped like a boomerang, and it sits up above us about 50 miles high and is cloaked so they don't scare us to death. But there's about 24 other motherships, and they're all taking these readings of these of the effects of the 4 negative energies. So it's all scientific readings, and they do these on a daily basis, millions and millions of readings.
When we see these smaller UFOs, are they all coming from these motherships, do you think?
Yes. Now, the craft like the saucer shape and all, those are kind of known as scout craft. But they can also control what are known as highly advanced drones. And these drones, one craft can control about 22 of these drones, and the drones do the work of taking all these readings of not only the land, the water, animals, birds, you name it, plus humans.
Tom, when you talked about the 4 negative energies and there's, 10 positive energies, do they counteract each other?
They can't really exist exactly with each other. That's why the Earth experiment came about because no one in any of these trillions of universes could work with these negative energies. It was impossible. We're the first ones to be able to do that.
Do we have any results from the Earth experiment? I mean, is it working?
Oh, it's worked. It's successful.
Which is a good thing.
Yes. And this Earth experiment will go along for another 7,000 Earth years, and it'll be finished. And we'll all, by that time, have gone back to the planets that we originally came from. We all came from other planets, which is why when you see these movies about Star Wars, there really was a real Star Wars. It lasted for 27,000 universal years, but because Earth years are 10 times faster than universal years, that Star Wars lasted for 270,000 years.
How long have you been in contact with these ETs?
2008.
So about 15 years, going on 15 years. Interesting.
Yeah. And it's really gotten heavy in the last year because you have to understand, we haven't gotten into this. I'll touch on it now. But there are 12 parallel timelines. There are 12 parallel U's. So the upper timelines have easier lives, and the lower timelines have much harder lives. So as an example, Vietnam War did not happen on the upper timelines. So what's happened is that my family on the upper timelines, starting with, say, 11, because 12 is non-physical, they visited the Sirian mothership, and they've each timeline all the way down to timeline 7 has visited the Sirian mothership and shot for 14 days each. And so this year it's supposed to be our turn for us to go up to the Sirian mothership and shoot for 14 days.
And when you say Sirian, it's from the Sirius star cluster, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And this particular ship, I believe, is from the Sirius B star system. They have people on board from 37 different planets, 39 different types of people, we'll call them, insect beings, bird beings, amphibians, even a couple of reptilians. I know I'm forgetting some, but you get an idea of quite a variety of people on board the ship.
The efforts with the Atlantis and Lemuria, how did that start?
60,000 years ago, the ETs seeded both Atlantis and Lemuria with Homo sapiens, okay? And they tried to help these people out by giving them free energy. And for the Atlanteans, it was giant crystals known as posers that were magnetically charged so that they broadcast beams of energy, and that's how the whole continent ran. All the cars and airplanes and houses and apartments all had this free energy. The problem with it, the Atlanteans went ahead and developed it into weapons of war, and they developed laser weapons based on these energies. And the same thing happened with the Lemurians. They were given free energy, just a different type, and they developed hydrogen-type bombs out of that. And eventually both societies destroyed themselves.
Are they happy with the way our planet is going right now?
Yes, because they can see the future. They can go to the future and go to the past equally. So they know that the Earth experiment is successful, and we just have to catch up with the rest of this Federation of Planets, where there are 20,000 planets that are members.
Tom, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and talk more about your work next on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, we'll open up the phone lines with Tom T. Moore. We'll be talking about some of his other books, including The Gentle Way with Pets, Angelic Help for Your Animal Companions, which is an amazing story as well. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Tom T. Moore with us. And Tom, back a year and a half ago or so, you wrote a book called The Gentle Way with Pets. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I have found that you can request benevolent outcomes not only for things in your life, but also your relationships with your pets. And I also, in these meditations that I do, where I've asked 30,000 questions in a meditative state, I found out that, as an example, there is one soul that ensouls every single dog on Earth. And there is one soul that ensouls every single domesticated and feral cat on Earth. And when I asked, well, what about the lions and tigers? Cat Soul said, Tom, we like to share the work. So the book gives you an insight into what we commonly call group souls, simply to differentiate, if I could say that, from our souls. But they're actually, the souls are the same, it's just they have different interests than we do. And just like the soul that ensouls our son, that soul has a different interest than we do. So that's how I get into, and I speak to snake soul, darn, and all sorts of other types of pets, parrots, and so on, and they generally tell me that they come from the far reaches of the universe, and that we have not yet discovered that the universe is actually 25 billion years old, not 13.2 or 6, whatever they estimate now. And the James Webb telescope is going to eventually say that it's 20 billion. But
wow, what a big difference.
But they still will not have seen the very far reaches of the universe, which is 25 billion years old.
So for people who have always wondered whether their pets have souls, you can give them comfort by saying, yes, they do, don't you?
Absolutely. And when they transition, you can say, I request a most benevolent outcome for Fido to come back for another life with me. And my guardian angel says, well, we take that to a higher authority, and it's done. So in other words, they get the same fragment of that dog soul back with them for another life. And that's very comforting for people to know that they'll have another life with that dog.
It's fascinating. Now, you believe in reincarnation of pets. Do they ever reincarnate into humans, or do they stay as animals?
They stay. If it was a dog, it'll stay as a dog. What happens when they transition is that they are guided along energetic pathways to what are called staging areas. And there'll be a staging area just for dogs. And they are assigned a new birth mother. And that birth may be in the past, present, or future. So if someone is requesting a benevolent outcome for Fido to come back for another life with them, they can't say, oh, this dog is 3 years old and mine just died. It doesn't work that way. So just remember, whatever attracts you to that animal will be the correct attraction.
Now, you had mentioned before the break about these 12 parallel frequencies that are out there. Are they just basically parallel universes? What are they?
No. they're only for this solar system. So there are 12 Earths, and timeline number 12 is non-physical because our souls consider that to be the perfect life, and then all the others are physical. So we're on timeline 6, we're the middle frequency, which is why I was mentioning a little earlier that timelines 11, 10, 9, 8, and 7 have all visited the Sirian mothership, and now it's our turn this year.
Well, with Tom T. Moore, we're going to take calls with Tom next hour here on Coast to Coast. His website is called thegentlewaybook.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Is there anything about what you have learned that scares you, frightens you, makes you uncomfortable?
No. The more you learn, the more amazing and wondrous creation is. You have to understand, ETs know there really, truly is a creator, because we're veiled from knowing, we don't know whether there's a creator or not. And a lot of people say, well, my God is better than your God, and if you don't believe in my God, you're not going to heaven. And that's not true.
I think there's only one God, huh?
There is only one creator. I use the word creator because that word is accepted in all the major religions.
Have there ever been wars in space, Tom?
Absolutely. The Star Wars I mentioned earlier lasted for 270,000 Earth years.
My
so
God.
You can imagine. Yeah, it's amazing. 27,000 universal years. So every single person having a life on this planet in previous lives where they were on other planets went through periods of time when their whole lives were lived in fear that they would wake up one day and see an enemy ship that was about to blow up their sun and destroy all the planets orbiting that sun and the billions of people that lived on those planets. And that happened on both sides, the reptilian Dracos and what became the Federation of Planets. They played that game back and forth, back and forth.
Now, your ET contact, how do they communicate with you? How does it communicate with you?
Simply telepathically. Everyone, and anyone can do this, okay, because everyone has what's called the pineal gland in the back of your head.
Right.
And in the Hindu religion, it's called the third eye, but it's your pineal gland, and it acts as an antenna for every kind of telepathic feeling, thought, you name it. And so I receive thought packets from all sorts of beings, but including Antura, and so that's how we communicate, with thought packets.
Fascinating. It really is. Are you glad this has happened to you?
Well, it was on my soul contract. I was shocked when I was told. I was about to close off the book back in 2013 on first contact conversations with an ET.
Right.
And he kept hinting, well, we're going to meet. Now, oh, great, we're going to get to meet. And and you're going to get to fly in my scout craft. Oh, fantastic. Can I take some photos? Oh, yeah, sure. And finally it was like using the old proverb, hitting a donkey over the head with a 2x4. He said, look, Tom, your family is going to come up to our ship, and you're going to shoot for 14 days, and you're going to have the complete run of the ship with the exception of the engine room. And we're also going to show you videos. They have been videoing our whole experience for over 1 million years. And they have these little bitty drone cameras that operate at a frequency just above our ability of our eyes to see them. And so they have capturing on video every single major event that's happened on Earth.
Since you've been doing this, and you've been doing it for some time now, I mean, where's the future here? What's next?
Well, after we go to the ship, we're going to shoot enough footage for 1 and possibly 2 feature-length documentaries.
You're going to do a documentary on a UFO mothership, and they're going to let you?
Yes.
Wow.
It's going to be a 4-camera shoot. And
you'll see ETs running around and everything?
Yes. And
fascinating.
We're going to look at their art, their music, we're going to have interviews with all the different types of ETs on the ship, 39, and each one of those will become one episode of a series. There's going to be at least 100 episodes. We're going to look at Neanderthals, and we're going to look at the history even of religions, which is going to be pretty controversial. And so it's that's the plan.
This will be the first documentary done with ETs, won't it?
Yes.
That's fascinating. What do they look like, Tom?
Well, they're all different, as I said.
As we've always thought, like alien grays, humans looking, everything like that?
Some of them, yes.
Reptilians?
Yep. Antura is amphibian. As I mentioned, they have bird beings that have a bird presence. They have insect beings. Oh, they have plant beings. If you can imagine an intelligent plant walking down the corridor, I mean, that's going to be kind of different. And these 2 reptilians, the reptilians, the war finally ended. There was what they call the Great War. They finally came to a peace accord, and so these 2 reptilians on the ship are looking and watching the people that have reptilian souls. As part of the peace agreement, 10% of all the souls that are having lives on Earth have reptilian souls.
As I mentioned, next hour we'll take calls with Tom T. Moore. Gina in for Tom, who's headed to Denver for our Beyond Belief TV programs this week. That will be taping, and she is lining up calls right now, so the lines are open if you want to take a jump before they really start to get packed here. This is fascinating stuff. You said a 4-camera shooter, so you're going to bring 4 camera people up there with you?
It's going to be my family, yes. My daughter has a degree in film from a university in Los Angeles. I won't mention which one right now. And I've co-executive produced some super low-budget movies and films, and which is going to be needed because it's just going to be us and the cameras and not much else.
What's your daughter think of Daddy who deals with ETs?
I try and shield my family from all of this. This is something that they're going to be immersed in for the rest of their lives, because I've already been told that my son and daughter will return in 10 years, and I won't be with them because I will have transitioned by that time. Now, whether it will be of old age or whether it will be violent, because there are going to be millions of people that are going to be just despise me for telling the truth about their religions. I don't know.
Tom, there's a directive called the Earth Directive. What is that?
The Earth Directive came about after Atlantis and Lemuria destroyed themselves, and all these Federation of Planets, these 20,000 planets, got together and said, "Hey, look, we're going to have to leave them alone. They're going to sink or swim on their own. We obviously contributed to having two societies destroy themselves, and so we're not going to help them whatsoever. So everything that we invent is going to be on us. They're not going to give us anything.
Fascinating. It really is. And what do your friends say about this?
Well, they know me for who I am and what I've been.
They accept this?
Yeah, as far as close friends, yeah. But obviously, one of the nice things is that we are in the international film distribution business, but we're located in the DFW area, so we're not in Los Angeles. So I don't hobnob with other distributors or.
In May, I'm doing a live show, and one of my guests will be Travis Walton, and you know the name, of course, who was beamed aboard a ship, and his logging buddies, everybody passed lie detector tests is telling the truth. It's truly a remarkable story. How many people like you, Tom, are on this planet who have this kind of contact?
Not too many, I don't think. I'm an old soul, and I wrote my ticket, so to speak. I was this spiritual amphibious leader on Nomo, that water planet in the Sirius B star system. And during the Star Wars, I suggested that they offer the reptilians to have 10% of the souls take part in the Earth Experiment. And they hated the reptilians so much because of all this very long war. They said no, that won't work. And so another 450 universal years went by, and we weren't doing very good. The Federation sounded like it was slowly losing the war. And so finally they said, okay, we'll try this. And they accepted. And so after that, the Federation said, well, you're going to be one of our advisors.
All right, Tom, we're going to take a quick break, but at the top of the hour, we'll come back and take phone calls with you. Amazing discussion with Tom T. Moore about extraterrestrials. We're going to take your calls when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Tom T. Moore with us. Again, his website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Let's talk a little bit about Atlantis and Lemuria, Tom, before we go to calls. Tell me about that situation.
Okay. Where do we start? Okay.
Exactly. Where do we start?
Okay. Atlantis, 30,000 years ago, there was a line of volcanoes that bisected the continent of Atlantis, which was in the Atlantic Ocean. And they all exploded at the same time due to the pressure of the plates going together.
Tectonic plates, yeah.
Right. And they exploded, and most of the continent disappeared at that time. And the seas rose over 160 feet, drowning everyone, not only that lived on the continent of Atlantis, but all around the world when these huge tsunamis came crashing in and wiped out every single village, town, and city all around the world. Now, that was the first really big destruction. Then 12,500 years ago, that's when the Poseidons and the Arians started warring, and the Arians did a Pearl Harbor-type sneak attack and used these laser weapons, and 1.5 million people died the very first day of the war, but eventually all the islands sank. So that was and that happened 12,500 years ago, and that was also when the story of Noah came into being, because that actually happened. Then the Lemurians, 7,500 years ago, decided to bomb each other, and with these huge bombs and destroyed their continent.
How close did Plato have it?
Well, Plato actually had access to some documents, or these, what do you call them, script things. I'm calling them the wrong thing, that his grandfather got from Egypt. His grandfather had traveled to Egypt and had bought these documents, and they're actually in a basement still somewhere in Athens.
Oh, really? Boy, they'd be worth a fortune today, huh?
Wouldn't they? And so that's where his story came about. People keep saying, "Oh, that was," he was alluding to the politics of the time, but it wasn't. He was really talking about what he had read in these old parchments.
You've got a weekly newsletter that you publish with conversations from your ET friend, don't you?
Yes, and others, my guardian angel and all. It's free. It's my gift to the world. Don't charge for it. You can go to my website at that www.thegeneralwaybook.com, and on the first page you can sign up for the newsletter.
And how often are you chatting with them?
I try and do it a couple of sessions a week. They're typically an hour and a half to 2 hours. I can't go more than about 2 hours because I lose my concentration.
Interesting. Okay, let's go to the phones. This hour is going to blow by real quickly. First-time caller Drew in Omaha, Nebraska with us. Hi, Drew.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Good to have you with us. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Just staying up a little bit later and listening to the radio. So,
it doesn't get any better, Drew, does it?
No, not at all. I got a question. So, have you ever been on like a UFO or spaceship? I guess.
Tommy, have you?
I have not. No.
Not yet, anyway. But you will be when you do this documentary, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Are you looking forward to that?
I am. It's been promised for a long time, and as we got closer and closer, I kept asking questions. Well, has Timeline 8 been on the ship yet? Well, has Timeline 7 been on the ship yet? And that's Timeline 7 was on last year in 22, I think somewhere around May.
Have you ever asked them about their propulsion system, how they travel?
Yes, they call it portal hopping, and
they're like bending space and time, aren't they?
Yeah, and there are these energetic pathways between planets and also even between galaxies. So when they portal hop, they can't go from one end of the galaxy, one end of the universe to the other. They have to do what's called portal hopping, where they'll go from one galaxy to the next to the next.
Next up, speaking of next, Mayat's in New York City. Welcome to the show. Hello, Mayat.
Good morning, gentlemen. How fascinating. I had just picked up, and I have some comment and a three-parter, and Tom, I'll listen over the air. But I just picked up a book that I lucked on, and Amazon can be brilliant in that, and it's called The Extraterrestrial Species Almanac.
That's done by Craig Campobasso, a friend of ours.
Absolutely, and when I got it, Tom, and you know how you read the back first, and somebody we know named George Norrie had the most excellent and pithy, he said, the go-to book on life in the universe. So the first part of my question is, are you familiar with it? And George, please bring Craig on soon, because he actually lays out a number of species. So my questions would be, are you familiar with the book? And if you are the illustrations, do you feel they are pretty accurate? And he gives such an excellent breakdown in terms of the the universal origin, the physical, the belief systems, the cosmic agenda, technology, consciousness, and dimensional abilities and capabilities. So it's just such a fascinating book that I had picked it up before I even knew you were coming on the program. My other comment is when you're talking about Atlantis, I had just read the Book of Secret Wisdom, the prophetic record of human destiny and evolution translated from the Senzar, Senzar, very, very, very ancient language by Novia Duskova, a Hungarian professor and scholar. And she had just described what happened to Atlantis vis-a-vis your comment, and that knowledge without love is dead. So any comment on that? But you seem to, I surmise that you have extraordinary psychic abilities. So if you have any tips for those of us who, want to work on that and better intuition. And the last part would be, what books and films do you recommend? I recently discovered Amazon Prime, which I haven't used, has loads of UFO and, ET films. So as I get on board with that, your recommendations and suggestions are greatly appreciated. Thank you, George.
Okay, you can take a few of those if you want, Tom. Go ahead.
Wow. Okay, I'm not familiar with that book. I can only go with the descriptions that Antura has given to me of a lot of the beings on board his ship. And as I say, his ship is a Sirian ship. So as an example, the Palladian ship, which is not quite as large as his ship, according to what the Palladian told me, they have a lot of different beings. I always thought that the first people that we would meet that would be ETs would look like us, because there are Palladians that look just like us, with exception maybe of pointed ears. And so I was really shocked when I first started talking to Antura, thinking that he was going to look like us, and it turned out he was totally different. And so that's kind of what I've had to go on, and so it'll at least be a start for us to show us that there are many different kinds of beings out in the universe, and if there are that many types of beings in the Sirius B star system alone, can you imagine what the rest of the universe will hold for us?
Do you have any psychic abilities?
Not really. I ask questions, and I'll receive predictions from when I ask questions, because people from all over the world, I have thousands of readers, and I get these questions in, and I write them down on a notebook, and then in these meditative sessions, I ask these questions and receive answers, and I estimate that I'm in the 80 to 90% accuracy, so meaning that 10 or 20% of the time I'm not correct, and it can be because of planetary positions. Maybe I'm exhausted from my day work in the film business or whatever, but there are many reasons why you just don't always receive correctly.
West of the Rockies, Daniel's with us, Sonoma County, California. Welcome, Daniel. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George, and hello, Tom.
Hi.
This is really quite exciting. Yes, I am actually a reincarnated Egyptian scribe.
Uh-huh.
I know a lot about Atlantis because I went deeper into that and realized Egypt is from Atlantis. That's where they went. You probably know this, after they crashed each other out, the Lemurians, Atlanteans. And Lemuria, the last part of it that's left is Hawaii, of course. You probably know that Hawaii is the tip of Lemuria. But anyway, moving on, my question for you is, did you know about the healing machines they had in Atlantis that you would just stand in front of and it would clear your auras and heal you instantly. Have you heard of that?
Sure, I have. Now, how they did it, I don't know, but I have heard about that. And by the way, on the Egyptian side, I was inspired to create the gentle way back 12,700 years ago on a life on Poseidia, and I had 1 million followers. But because there was so much war starting to go on, I and 25,000 of my followers migrated to Egypt, and an Egyptian princess helped us settle, and that Egyptian princess is my wife today, and her next life will be as a man back about 12,500 years ago, and he'll be a great leader for his people, and I will be his assistant, which is a past life for me. It's very complicated.
Interesting. Now, how do you get your recollection of past lives, Tom?
Oh, I just ask about them.
Aha. So it's not like you dream about it, know about it?
Sure. I mean, I write my dreams down every morning, but I just found as I'm asking all these questions, things keep coming up about past lives, and because I'm supposedly one of only 10 people on the world that have had over 1,000 lives. I'm on my 1,005th.
Jeez.
Dalai Lama is on his 1100.
Why do you keep coming back, Tommy?
Because they tell me I've got 300 more lives to go, and all these people that are wanting to be leaders of countries want me to be with them, to be their advisor. And so in other lives, I'm advisors to world leaders, but not this life.
Holly in Santa Cruz, California. Hi, Holly. Go ahead.
Hopefully you're not drowning there.
Almost. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
Thank you.
I would love for you to elaborate on soul contracts. I'm really interested in that. And a couple of my questions is, does everyone have a soul contract? How do you do it? How do you know if you're messing it up? Like what?
Okay. Everybody does have a soul contract. The way you stay on your soul contract, because we are veiled from knowing, and we're veiled because we're supposed to learn how to make trillions of decisions a second, like the Creator does. But that's a longer story. But anyway, if you want to stay on your soul contract, you say, "I request a most benevolent outcome." You say this out loud. To stay on my soul contract. Thank you. And then you request benevolent outcomes every day, and it raises your vibrational level at the same time keeping you on your soul contract so you don't go off on a different path that's not as good for your learning.
Fascinating how that all works, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got David east of the Rockies in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, David, let's get you in before the break. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I have a couple questions here about the aliens, the different types of aliens in general, and the possible star systems. Now, the Palladians are, as I understand, are more like human-like. Is that correct?
Some are. Okay, keep in mind there are thousands of planets in the Pleiades.
Yeah.
So they have a variety of different-looking people or beings on those planets.
And it interests me, like the Orions that the Egyptians are normally associated with. Did they were like tall? Did they have green skin or what?
The Pleiadians?
No, or the Orions, what the Egyptians were associated with.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not a question I can answer.
In Craig Campobasso's book, he talks about grays, reptilians, hybrids, and Nordiques. Are there others, Tom?
Yeah. Most are beyond our beliefs. I mean, there are beings that look like they're just attached to the ground, but they're intelligent beings. So how do you classify them?
Your contact contacts you telepathy-wise. How often?
Well, when I do these meditative sessions, they don't interfere with my normal life.
If you don't do the session, you don't communicate?
Right.
Interesting take on that. Tell us one more time about the newsletter. We're going to take a break and come back and take final calls. But you have a free newsletter for people.
Yes. Go to www.thegentleWayBook.com, and on the front page you can sign up for my newsletter, and you can also go to Articles and News, where all of my newsletters are archived since 2007.
It's fantastic. And this documentary that you plan to do aboard a mothership will be done when?
I don't know. I've been told that I'm going to get this invitation so that we'll know, and that I will have to assemble my family at my house, and they're going to beam down from the scout ship to my back door and knock on the back door. The four team members of this grassroots contact team to introduce themselves.
And you'll let us know when it's ready to be viewed?
My daughter and I will have to prepare what's called a pitch deck in the film industry, and that's something that we will be showing to potential people like the
like Netflix and stuff like that. We're going to come back, Tom, and take final calls next. Next hour, William Peters joins us at Heaven's Door as we talk about the shared death experiences, so make sure you're part of the program. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with Tom T. Moore, our final segment. Tom, what if they beam you aboard a craft and they keep you?
Excuse me. That isn't going to happen. It's all part of these soul contracts. That's all I
So you trust them?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's Jeff in Santa Rosa, California. You're our next caller. Hey, Jeffrey, go ahead.
Hey, George, good talking with you again.
You too.
Thank you. There was a couple of Pleiadians that I spoke with that George interviewed months ago, maybe a year or so ago, a Vanguard and apparently a mission volunteer out of Oslo, Norway. And I asked them about androids and their weapon systems. I explained a little bit how they lock in place, and they have this laser fire. They said they weren't in charge of them. There is a vast army of androids, at least through the United States, and I'm assuming also globally, that use these weapon systems to record information, to invade other people's body, and that can actually kill. Since then, I found out that the Greys are the ones that are in charge of the frontline androids and the mission volunteers when the mission volunteers call in for a Grey defense. And that the mission volunteers, at least the one I am familiar with, also has the same weapon systems, but the body locks a little differently in order to get the deployment of the fire. I would like to know, I should add also that the mission volunteers insert. They don't reincarnate. Neither do any of the Pleiades. They insert. And this mission volunteer has bred with a real person and re-engineered the DNA to get another body container for another mission volunteer to come into that is also weaponized. And I would like to get your take on what you know about the androids and the android army that's on Earth, please.
Interesting.
Okay.
Tom, go ahead.
That's just not the information that I'm receiving. Okay? That's not, that would be against the Earth Directive. And the Zetas took advantage of a hole in the Earth Directive when they were abducting people to see if their DNA would match enough to create hybrids. But it took the Federation of Planets a little while when you've got 20,000 planets that I guess have to approve an amendment, but they did, and they no longer can abduct people But that's the only. I just don't find any information about androids that would be against the Earth Directive. Sorry.
Interesting take. Could he be misled, do you think, Tom?
Well, gently, I would say probably. But,
I get it. Next up, let's go to Elisa in Oregon. Welcome to the program. Hi, Elise.
Hi, Tom. Hi, George.
Hi.
So the more I'm on hold and listen, I have more questions I have.
Great.
So I narrowed it down to two. The first question is, you were saying about pets reincarnating, staying in the pet species.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guest that George had on a while back who claims he was a horse in a past life, but he was a human in this life. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I am. Before your first life on Earth, you can have one life as an animal. In my case, I chose a panther in a jungle because my first life was going to be in a jungle. But I've been told that a lot of people choose horses, and I said, "Well, are any of them race horses?" And I was told if they do race, they're generally like fifth or sixth back. They don't win the race.
Why not?
That's they're just there to experience Earth and get their feet wet with these four negative energies, and so they're doing it an easy way with horses.
What's your other question, Lisa? Go ahead.
My other question is these Palladian ships and whatnot, are they actually outside of time, and does that tie into the Mandela effect and the 12 different Earths? And I think we just cut me off. Please.
Are they outside of it? Are they like time-traveling machines, Tom?
They can travel in time, yes. Okay. But the Mandela effect is something completely different because we're rewriting our past, present, and future all the time, and which is why I have a prayer that I say each morning. I ask any and all beings to aid, comfort, and assist people that have harmed either physically, mentally, morally, spiritually, or emotionally in any past, present, or future life. And I ask any and all beings to come to the aid and comfort of the families and friends of anyone that I've ever harmed in any way in any past, present, or future life. And supposedly that helps rewrite the past and future because you are, in some ways, hurting other people, whether it be physically or some other way in all your lives. So I have that little prayer, and it's on my website at you look under signs at my website.
All right, let's go to Joshua in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hey, Josh, go ahead.
Hey, how we doing? Great topic. I have a question and a comment. My comment is I almost feel like we are the most attractive things in the universe, and maybe the reason why gods and the Nephilim come and take our women. And my question is, and I'll listen off air. My question is, the term old soul, new soul, is there any validity to that? And how are new souls made? If population keeps growing, where are these souls coming from? And if you're a new soul, how are you choosing to be here if you've never been here before? And if population just keeps going bigger and bigger, where are these souls coming from?
There's an old Hebrew saying, Tom, of the Gulf, where souls are kept like a depository. What do you think?
Okay. First of all, we are fragments of souls. And as an example, there are soul clusters where there are 6 to 12 fragments of a soul having lives on Earth. And while our souls are also having 500,000 to 1 million lives all across the universe for their learning. And there's a reason for that, but it's too long to get into. So we're these soul fragments, And on average, a soul fragment will have 600 to 800 lives on Earth. And at this time period, because there are so many people on Earth, 8 billion, we're actually having overlapping lives. So as an example, in the 20th century, I know I've had at least 5 or 6 overlapping lives going on at the same time, and that's probably the way it is for most people, that we have these lives because they need to fill the bodies, I guess.
Next up, we've got Jesse in Durango, Colorado. Hey, Jess, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
We're good.
You and Tom doing? Good.
All good, thanks.
I wanted to find out if Tom had any or seen. The History Channel had a deal on Atlantis or a continent coming back up off of the base twice in the last 40 years. Is the only time I've been able to catch it. But the continent is slowly rising up, and they had sent a diver, the small unmanned dive unit down to see what was going on, and found structures and craft and whatnot, and wondered if he had heard anything about that, or if the combination of the two, with that as well as it coming up, because it's like 800 plus thousand square miles that's coming up.
But the continent itself broke up completely, except for like the Canary Islands and the Bahamas and Bermuda. It broke completely apart. So I mean, it's in pieces. So I don't see that continent ever rising again. That's maybe a nice story, but I just don't think that's going to happen.
All right, let's take a few more calls here as we still have a little bit of time left. Let's go next to Stephen in Greenwater, Washington. Stephen, go ahead, sir.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Stephen.
I'm curious. I want to ask your guest about Bigfoot, if he knows anything about Bigfoot, and if so, any of the other cryptids connected to missing hunters and campers and hikers, and they're not friendly. Go ahead.
Okay. And you could go on my website to that articles and news page, and you type in Bigfoot or type in Sasquatch, and you'll find I've asked a lot of questions. I understand that they're able to shift dimensions, and which is why we don't see them very often. They're pretty shy beings, and they're just able to shift away and not be where we can see them very often. So I don't know a lot about them, but I have. If you go there, I have asked some questions, but I've asked so many questions over a time period I don't remember.
That's another book by itself, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Questions I've asked. Melissa in Middletown, Connecticut. Hey, Melissa, welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you so much. I literally sit after work. I work overnights, and I sit in my car to listen to you all the time.
Thank you. Don't fall asleep.
No, it's too late to fall asleep at this point. But I am so interested in this whole subject. I have so many questions, and I think it all leads down to one basic thing. You were talking about that you understand your wife is going to be someone else in another life, and as will you. So it leads me to believe this whole continuous time, everything happens all at once. But yet, how can we go back to visit, let's say, past loved ones that we have left in the past and still lead a future life while choosing our souls when, from my understanding, we can go to any planet or anywhere we want? So how does that all connect into one soul?
Okay,
Like one being?
our souls volunteered for the Earth Experiment. So our soul fragments are having these 600 to 800 lives on Earth, and you can go, you can have these lives. You can go back to the past and have one, or you can go forward. My next life on Earth will be in the 3400 era, where I'm going to be a female space pilot. But after that, I'm going to go back to 2600 era to prepare people for interplanetary travel, and then back to the 3400 era for another life there. But then even after that, I go back, and I'm going to have some lives back in the 20th century, where I'm going to be an advisor to a couple of religious leaders. So,
Tom, are you prepared for just about anything with these ETs?
well, I'm trying to. That's all you can do is just say, hey, I know I'm going to be godsmacked, I guess would be the word, in seeing this, but I've got a job to do, and that's my soul contract, so I'm going to do it the best I can.
Do you think your life has been leading up to this point?
Oh, yeah. And as I was told back in November, December, well, Tom, 2023 is here, and now the real work begins.
When you were a little boy, did you have any of these episodes with ETs?
No.
None at all?
I don't remember if I did.
But you sure have them now.
Yeah.
And again, this newsletter is basically a conversation with the ET, isn't it?
Well, not only Antura, but I also ask questions each week of Gaia, the soul of the Earth. I ask all the Earth questions, like in this past newsletter that's just going out now, I asked for an update on Yellowstone. It's still a 73% probability that the volcano is going to explode. And on the West Coast earthquakes, it's still sitting at 63%. It's been that way for about a year.
It'll happen indeed. Tom, thanks. Keep in touch. Let us know about that documentary aboard the mothership, okay?
Will do. Thank you.
Up next, William Peters joins us. We're going to be talking about shared death experiences. His work is called At Heaven's Door. Back in 2000, William Peters, our guest, was volunteering at the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco when he had an extraordinary experience as he read aloud to a patient. He suddenly felt himself floating in midair, completely out of his body. The patient, who was also aloft, looked at him, smiled, and the next moment, Peters felt himself return to his body. But the patient never regained consciousness and died. What is a shared death experience? In a moment, William Peters joins us at Heaven's Door on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. George Norrie with you. William Peters, our guest. He's back with us. Founded the Shared Crossing Project to raise awareness about the profound and healing experiences that are possible for the dying and their loved ones at the end of life. He is a marriage and family therapist at the Family Therapy Institute of Santa Barbara, holds a degree with a focus in group dynamics from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. William directs the Shared Crossing Research Initiative. It is the first research-based program designed to examine the causes of strategies for enabling the shared death experience. His book is called At Heaven's Door. He was last with us back in March of last year. William, welcome back. How have you been?
Hey, George. Thanks to have me. Thank you for having me, and it's good to be back, and I'm doing well.
Excellent. How did you get involved in the shared death experience? Was that episode I just mentioned?
Well, that was the first full-blown shared death experience I had. However, I will tell you that when I worked with persons essentially dying from AIDS, in San Francisco in the late 80s, early 90s, I was hearing about these experiences because I was a social worker at that time. And because the way that this community of men were dying, they were very close to one another, and they just had these deep relationships during the dying process that seems to facilitate the shared death experience. So I heard a lot about these experiences. And since I'd had a near-death experience before this work, and in fact, I had a second near-death experience after working with this AIDS population, I was very open and very receptive. So when I heard about these experiences, I was very curious and I was very supportive, and that led more and more people in that community to seek me out for affirmation.
I know in the back you've got some incredible people who have endorsed your book, including our dear friend Dr. Raymond Moody, one of the best, isn't he?
Raymond's spectacular, and his support in the early days of our research was phenomenal. I mean, it really helped get the word out, connect us with the right people, and it launched our research project, which today is the largest, most respected organization studying the shared death experience.
And explain what a shared death experience is, William.
Yeah. So a shared death experience occurs when somebody's dying and a caregiver, loved one, sometimes even just a bystander will express that they feel like they shared in the journey from this human life into the afterlife with this dying loved one. So as in a sense, they hitch a ride with the dying across the threshold into this next dimension, which we, call the afterlife. And people will refer to this, I should say the experiencers will say it was a glorious or beautiful or awe-inspiring afterlife. When they refer to this place that they see their loved ones going and they experience it with them, they don't have the words. So if you see the way I'm describing this now, it is identical in terms of phenomena as the near-death experience. So if you understand the NDE, you will understand the SDE, because Raymond and I have talked numerous times about this. It's that way because we're looking at the same landscape, the same geography that comes right after a human death.
Is a shared death experience, William, enlightening to the person who lives, or is it scary?
It is. We have over 250 deeply analyzed accounts, and we only have a handful that would, like say, like a half dozen, where they would say anything that would be what you might want to call, we call it a distressing SDE. And it's distressing because they just have no way of processing the event. Or here's the most distressing SDE we have. When the experiencer feels or connects so deeply to the experience of the person transitioning, we have cases where, let's say, the dying had a heart attack or a drug overdose. Mm-hmm. They will have an empathic connection, it appears, because they'll have those same symptoms. So what happens often is someone will call and say, hey, I've got to share this experience. My niece was dying of a fentanyl overdose, and at the same time, I was sweating, I was vomiting, I had my convulsions in my abdomen, and I blanked out, and it passed. But they say that when they were having this, they were very scared. When they learned later about our research, that suggests that, if you have a loved one who is having a distressing, traumatic end-of-life experience, a death, then you may empathically connect with it. Those are the only distressing SDEs we have. And when you recast them for the experiencer, they'll come back and say, oh, my gosh, now I get it. It feels like my dying loved one was reaching out to me to say goodbye or to share or to do something on the level of connection. But to be clear, those are less than, we have maybe a half dozen of those. Maximum would be 10 or so. but most of them are overwhelmingly transformative experiences for the better. We hear the most common after effect would be, I know my loved one is alive and well. I know that we'll be reunited again. I know that there's nothing to fear about death. And they'll say, I feel like this experience has awakened in me these intuitive, psychic, spiritual capacities. And so their anxiety around death not only just is alleviated, people get curious and drawn to get closer to death, to learn more about it, to be with people who are going through that experience. So it's wholly transformative in a positive way.
So it comforts them more than anything, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the best term, actually, George, is that the SDE is comforting because one data point in particular, and that is this, 51% of our experiencers report that they see the dying in the transition, and they see that they're alive and well, and this so comforts them, assuages their sense of loss. We all grieve when we lose a loved one, but when you have the SDE, you have a much larger context to cushion the loss. So it's incredibly affirming and comforting.
Our guest is William Peters. His book is At Heaven's Door. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Give us a few examples of other people's shared death experiences, William.
Sure. I'm gonna share one that's been on my mind since I heard it. Now, and believe it or not, I heard this case almost 6 months ago. But it so struck me because it speaks to a type of SDE in which an elevated being appears. And I've identified this being and named it as the conductor. And the conductor has this role, it appears, of transitioning soul, spirits, consciousnesses of human beings from the human existence into the afterlife. And it is a role, it appears to be a role because when the conductor appears, it has a type of personality, if you will. It can appear in a lot of different roles. In other words, it can be a lovely woman, angelic. It can be a majestic male type figure that can be commanding, even look like a military figure. But every time it appears, it has a sense of purpose, a sense of intensity, a sense of focus, and it seems like it's organizing a variety of, if you would say, like elements that are important to create an easy passing for the dying. And so it can be directive, even saying to the shared death experiencer, stand back. If the shared death experiencer is in the room with the person dying or at bedside, the conductor can often be in relationship with the shared death experiencer, telling them what to do, what not to do. Some will report that the conductor even puts them to sleep in a certain way and then wakes them up at certain times. So I'm going to give an example.
Okay.
And this comes from Gloria Kay. And so Gloria has her husband is dying, and her husband and her have talked quite a bit about what they want from death. And her husband has said to her, he's dying of cancer, he says, I want to show you everything I can about what death is, and I want to bring you along with me. So they have a kind of death compact, which is important because we feel that these agreements that the dying and the surviving loved ones make can help enable the SDE. And there's a whole lot of research on that. If you go back to the Society for Psychical Research in the late 1800s, there were the early researchers, Myers in particular, talked about the importance of death compacts bringing about apparitions and connections between the dying and their surviving loved ones. In this case, Gloria had this with her husband. So about 4 or 5 days before her husband dies, he's on hospice, in the hospital bed in the living room. She's in the kitchen, which is adjacent. And it's nighttime, and all of a sudden she describes this being appears between her in the kitchen and her husband in the hospice bed. And he is large, like an oversized being that actually has to duck to move through a doorway, which he does. And she refers to him as the tall one. And she says it was like the tall one had a light emanating from within him. So he shows up 4 or 5 days before Gloria's husband dies and really doesn't so much communicate directly with Gloria, but Gloria knows that he knows, the tall one knows that she's there. So he does eventually do certain things to her, like he draws her into the room to get closer to her husband. Gloria says it's like he was protecting her husband in a certain way in which she knew that she shouldn't be close or she could get close. He one time let her know that her husband's death was close at hand, so he brought her close. And then, strangely, she says, he kind of knocked me out. I kind of was trying to stay awake, and I just felt this overwhelming sleepiness come over me, and I just went to sleep. But then I woke up right at the time when he was about to pass. And in her own language, she says, it was like he was giving me some rest so that he could do some work energetically to prepare the space, if you will, but also give me some rest so that I could be awake and alert for this period of passing. And then as she awakes, she's there with him for a while, and as she'll also say, boy, it was difficult to talk about time in this space because it was a different time-space dimension. But she does say she remembers this kind of space opening up above her husband's bed, a vortex of sorts that was both confusing, a bit disorienting, but very clear that that's where her husband was going. And she watched her husband go up this energetic vortex above his bed, and the tall one, the conductor, was managing the entire process. Wow. And eventually acknowledged to her that it was time, he was going, and in his own way, be careful here because the conductor is always primarily focused on the dying, and in some cases communicates as needed with the surviving loved one, with the caregiver loved one, and in this case, kind of standard, gave some acknowledgement to her, and then was off with her husband into the afterlife and disappeared. Always ascension. We see this direction of ascending upwards in the SDE. So there's a really profound example. I'm just kind of summarizing it, that really got me focused on this question. Is there a guide, like I call it the conductor, that manages this transition for us? And now I'm going back with my team to look over all of our 250 cases, and we're seeing it. You know, we didn't really, George, we didn't know how to ask that question in the initial stages of our first 150 research participants, but now we're on it and we're going back and we're seeing in a higher prevalence. And when we ask, people will say, hey, by any chance did you feel any presences, any beings that might have been there to facilitate this transition? And people will sometimes say, oh, it's so funny that you ask. I felt this presence. And here's an important thing, George. Sometimes the conductor is visible and seen, and sometimes it's felt and sensed. And people will say, I felt this force that was kind of communicating to me, but I could definitely feel that this force was in relationship with my dying loved one.
How far into the shared death experience is that person taken? I mean, does it get to the point where if there's a heaven and hell and that person, the dying, is in there, Does that person go along with that, or does it just get to a certain point?
Yeah, this is. I love this question because, when we look at the NDE, what you hear over and over again is people, starting with an out-of-body experience, going into heavenly realms. Maybe there's a life review. You might see deceased relatives, maybe an elevated spirit being. You might move through a tunnel. You're always heading for a light. And the near-death experiencer will say sometimes they go into the light. Near-death experiencers do not come out the other side of the light. They either go into the light, but they always come back. In the shared death experience, it's very similar. So you'll have a series of experiences. The most profound one is that the SDEer will see the dying, and more often than not will witness the dying move through this afterlife space. Same phenomenon that you see in the NDE. The light seems to be the boundary. The SDEer will watch the dying enter the light, and once they enter the light and they don't see them anymore, they are almost immediately, they return to their body. So it seems like this space that the SDE takes place in is the initial stages of the afterlife. And the light seems to be the boundary between the initial stages of the afterlife and those next dimensions. Nobody in the SDE goes into the light and goes to the other side or stays there very long. They may be, dwelling in the light for a little bit, but everybody talks about, I was in the light, and that is the last stage. If you go into the light, there's not too much more phenomena after that in 99% of our cases. So the light is the boundary between the initial stages of the afterlife and the other stages of the afterlife, which, we can talk about, but that's a whole nother field, if you will.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with more with William Peters at Heaven's Door. We will take your calls next hour with William Peters as we talk about shared death experiences, questions, or perhaps it's happened to you. Share your story with us. We'll be back with him with more in just a moment as well on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie back with William Peters. His book is called At Heaven's Door. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com, sharedcrossing.com. William, does the shared experience have to be physical in that? Does the person who is sharing it with the dying have to physically be next to that dying person, or could they be hundreds of miles away?
That is a wonderful question, one that we assumed initially in our research that most people would be at bedside, if not all. In fact, Raymond Moody, who really presented the first research on this in around 2009 with his book, Glimpses of Eternity, all of his accounts were what we call bedside shared death experiences. When we started doing our research and we really opened up, to take in all sorts of different types of accounts, we found that 2/3, about 64% of our accounts were remote SDEs. And that means they were either, not in the bedroom. They could be in another room in the house. They could be across town, or they could be on the other side of the globe. And what we also found is these remote SDEs were just as profound and developed in the variety of phenomena as the bedside SDEs. So your proximity to the person dying does not matter.
Interesting. Now, who initiates the shared death experience, the dying or the living?
Yeah, another spectacular question, and it's something that, when we look at this experience, we still do not understand what makes it happen. That is the great question, because the question that follows up after that is naturally, hey, I want to have an SDE when one of my loved ones dies. How do I have it? Well, to answer that question, you have to understand the mechanics of the SDE. So I'm going to share what I think is I know it's the leading edge of understanding, but I'll also say quite humbly that we're going to learn a lot more about this because this is the growing edge of the research. What we know is that people who have SDEs, 41% of them will have more than one. So that tells us something. And we've identified these people as adepts. In other words, there seems to be people who, when they get around death, either physically, when they're, like, say, a hospice worker, a nurse, because we have nurses that report these things quite a bit, these are ones who are in physical proximity. But they don't necessarily have to be, because we have nurses who, hospice nurses in particular, who will say, oh, I was working with somebody on the ward or visiting them in my rounds, and then in the middle of the night, I had this person died who I was working with, and he or she came to me to let me know that they were okay, to thank me and express their love and appreciation for my care for them. So you can see how there's a type of person, it seems, that has a receptivity or openness to not just the SDE, but death itself. So I think if there's a characteristic that the SDE experiencer has, it's a comfortableness and an openness and a receptivity. I dare say a healthy curiosity and desire to be close to somebody who's dying. So there's no interference in that relationship, because the relationship is crucial in the SDE. That we can say, that's the substrate we're working with. There needs to be a bond between the dying and the loved one. Now, as I say that, you're going to, if you've listened to me talk about this before, there are some bystanders who have this. We have cases where a nurse was just, in the hallway where someone was dying, and they had the experience. But in those cases, there's a natural openness to these experiences. So, key here, openness to death and dying. A relationship bond is crucial. And the third element we see is about 2/3 of our shared death experiencers have mindfulness practices of some sort. That can be prayer, meditation. It can be a yoga or Tai Chi practice. It can even be walking in nature more or less as a practice. Like we see people saying, oh, yeah, we ask them, do you have a mindfulness or prayer practice? They go, no, not really. Any habitual practices? Oh, every night I walk on the beach at sunset. Okay, there you have it. When you have that type of practice, what you have there is a training, if you will, of your mind that is disciplined. And we know that people who have mindfulness practices have a greater ability to focus in on their own internal phenomena, but also on the phenomena and the experience, their own embodied experience around them. So that gives you a little bit about who has these experiences and why. The last point I'll make on this, George, is that 79% of our SDE experiencers will report an additional kind of death-related, what we call shared crossing. So they'll talk about the most common feature is they'll have a post-death vision or visitation from the dying, or some, high level of synchronicities. They'll say things like, these hummingbirds come to my window every day, or they'll see the date of their loved one's, an anniversary date, a birth date, something like that, pop up on a digital screen, either on the oven in their kitchen or on their clock radio, what have you. But they'll say, it comes up all the time. I know it's a communication from my departed loved one. So we see those reports, like I say, about 79% of the time.
Does the person, William, who's about to die always end up dying?
Well, if they weren't dying, that wouldn't be a shared death experience. So you're asking, can you have these type of SDE phenomena with somebody who gets close to death but doesn't die? If you do, George, it's going to be a slightly different phenomena. It might fall into the category of a pre-death vision or visitation, or maybe even what we might call a terminal lucidity event, something like that. The SDE has a different level of depth to it, more phenomena, I would say a kind of a deeper, more meaningful, more enduring phenomena that would separate it from other types of end-of-life phenomena.
Could it be like a near-death experience then? Can that be shared?
Well, it's interesting you say that because some people who call us, in our research will say, hey, I wanted to check this out with you. I had a shared near-death experience. So you're spot on with that question because really the SDE could be naturally referred to as a shared near-death experience because the phenomena is almost identical. I dare say, Raymond and I talk about this, Raymond Moody, and, we have acknowledged to each other the SDE and the NDE phenomena are identical, but every SDE and every NDE is completely unique and different. But the range of phenomena that's possible in these experiences is the same. And why? Because it appears like we're in the same dimension. This is the same geography, the same landscape that comes right after a human death in the initial stages of the afterlife.
How often is this happening, William, these shared death experiences?
Well, once again, this is a question that we just don't know. I mean, we'll know so much more in just a few more years as more researchers jump in. As I think about this, I think of Bruce Grayson, who's probably the most respected NDE researcher, and he says about 5% of the North American populace has had the NDE. So that's somewhere between 15 and 20 million folks. And I'll go out on a limb here, it's an educated guess, and say, well, there's so many more opportunities to be around people who are dying than there are opportunities to have a significant brush with death. I also will say this. There's a lot of hesitancy if you have an SDE to share it with a healthcare provider. If you're in a bedroom with somebody dying, whether it's an ICU, an ER, even a hospice, an inpatient hospice, if you say to a healthcare provider, I'm feeling like I'm seeing my deceased relatives or I'm seeing some spirit beings in the room here, they're going to look at you and say, hey, you're having a grief hallucination or you're under a lot of stress and you're having some delusional thinking. That's really common. Maybe go take a walk, drink some water. This is very overwhelming for you. So, these experiences have historically been not only discounted and diminished, in some cases, in more traditional medical settings, you run the risk of being diagnosed with a mental illness. And we do have in our research a number of cases like that. Not so much anymore, but in the early days of doing the research, people would say to us, I have a case that really stuck out in my mind where somebody was at the bedside having an SDE, and her mother was also there, and the mother felt this huge rush of light come into her body. She kind of started saying to everybody what she was seeing, light beams, and Aunt George was there. And the hospital personnel literally removed her from the room and then treated her for a psychotic episode.
Wow.
So that's a rare case, but this is the reasons why I think there's a lot more SDEs out there, but people are afraid to share them.
Like a lot of people have been afraid to share UFO experiences.
I think it's very analogous, George, yes.
What about the medical community, William? Have they jumped on board on this at all to look at it?
Well, the medical community is a vast community with a lot of different perspectives. I can say this. We recently published the first article ever in the medical sciences on the SDE. It was published almost a year ago now in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. And the reviewers, this is a very well-respected journal, and the reviewers were kind of tongue-in-cheek in the way they responded to this article that we submitted initially by saying things like, thank you for doing this work. We know these experiences happen. This is the first robust study on this. This is a great contribution. So those who are familiar veterans of hospice nurses, doctors who have been around this, death and dying for some time, they know these experiences happen. There's never been research. So now the research is out there. We're providing it. Others are jumping in from around the world to do research. I think we're at the front end of a major transformation, certainly in the hospice and palliative end of healthcare. And then gradually it will switch into other areas. And there are ER doctors. Our medical director, Dr. Monica Williams, is well aware of these experiences in the ER. And when she starts, when she works with families, if she has someone dying in the ER and she sees family members who are having experiences, she's one of the people who know about SDEs. In her ER, she will affirm the experiencers and tell them this is normal, this can happen. And in doing that, that really allows for more of the SDE experience to be received and appreciated by the various family members, because you can have a multiple family or multiple person SDE. That's a whole other category we can talk about later, but sometimes many people in the same family or same gathering of loved ones will share an SDE experience.
Will the SDEs make both the living and the dying person feel better?
Well, I can't speak for the experience of the dying, except to say that when the SDE experiencers report communications directly with the dying, and like I said, 51% of the SDE experiencers report seeing the dying. When out of that 51%, I think about half of that, so we're not talking about a quarter of total SDEs, will report some significant communication between the dying and the SDE experiencer. And what they tend to communicate is that the dying will say to the experiencer, I'm alive and well. Thank you for taken care of me. Mm-hmm. And they will see the dying often appears elated and relieved to be out of their human body, to not be suffering from the pain that often comes with human death. And so the dying seems to take pleasure in expressing that to the surviving loved ones. So yes, but in almost every case, the SDE experiencer feels, not just wonderful about the experience, kind of elated by the experience, like ecstatic by the experience. Now, I want to go back to a question you asked before, George, about who initiates this. I'm going to suggest that it is the dying that actually initiates this, and I'll tell you why. Because what we see in some of our cases is that the dying sometimes is with the conductor and asks the conductor for permission to communicate with a deceased loved one, to bring them into the afterlife. And sometimes, this isn't a large number of cases, but sometimes the experiencer will report that I saw my dying relative talking to this elevated being, asking for permission to bring me along in the experience. Can my surviving loved one come with me? And can I show them where we are? Can I show them?
That's dramatic. That's dramatic indeed. William, we'll come back and take phone calls with you next. And we'll be back with more with William Peters, and we'll take your calls as we talk about At Heaven's Gate, shared death experiences right here on Coast to Coast AM. And we are back with William Peters right here at Coast to Coast. William, what's the message you would like a reader to take away when they read At Heaven's Door?
Well, I want them to realize that death is really just such a mystical wondrous experience. It's an experience that offers us an opportunity to experience some of the more spiritual aspects of our being, and in a sense that I want people to really step into death as a way of getting to know themselves and the nature of reality in the deepest, most intimate way that, quite frankly, is really beautiful, wonderful, loving. It kind of offers us the opportunity for the best, most sublime experiences that we can have as human beings. I feel that death is a doorway in our culture that is largely closed. We need to open it up and tap into the more spiritual, enduring aspects of ourselves.
I'm interested with the so-called conductors, whether they're the guardian angels or spirit guides that pop up. Tell me a little bit more about that, your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, you know, we see angels or elevated beings reported about 17% of the time in our research. So it's just under 1 in 5 experiences. But sometimes they're just these angelic light beings, if you will, that seem to be present and observing. But sometimes these beings are active. In other words, they are facilitating this transition. That's the best way I can say it. They have an active role. They are not observers. They are, engaged in this transition of human souls or spirits across the threshold. And sometimes they're quite forceful. I mean, I'm thinking of an early case. I'll give you another one where at this time I didn't have the term conductor. I knew about elevated spirit beings that appear, but I didn't think of it in terms of a conductor. It was later I read over this case, and I'll share it with you. A daughter is at the bedside of her mother dying, and all of a sudden she sees this majestic, she describes majestic, large, almost military-type being, male, come down, and it's almost in a type of uniform, she said. And he started moving his arms almost in a coaxing motion, and he literally pulled the spirit of her mother out of her mother's body, and she saw this translucent, kind of ghost-like figure leave out of her mother's frown, if she will, and then her mother was out of the body fully, very close to the conductor, almost as if to embrace. At that point, the conductor, who was very focused and stern and like doing this practice, if you will, almost ritually, like pulling the spirit out, all of a sudden the conductor calms down as if to say, we've done the hard work here. And there's a relaxing, and then all of a sudden she sees her mother elated and happy and free and moving around in this disembodied state. And the conductor then backs off a little bit, but then is clearly, ushering this ascension with the dying upward. In this case, it was the mother who then turned and thanked the daughter, was elated, and they moved upwards. And then other beings were there as well. These were not conductor beings. These are what we call kind of the welcoming party. Some elevated beings, some deceased relatives, some you don't even know who they are. So there's kind of the idea of what the conductor, how it presents itself, and how it's different from other angelic or spirit beings.
Let's take some calls with you for the remaining portion of this hour. Ray in Orlando, Florida, to get us started. Hey, Ray, go ahead.
Oh, good afternoon. Good evening, rather.
Hi.
Hello, Mr. Peters. I wanted to relate to you that most of the things you discussed are verified by my own experiences. 50 years ago, my brother died, and we were 640 miles apart. And about 11 o'clock in the morning, 600 miles away, I looked up. I happened to be sleeping, and I saw a vision, an apparition in my room. And when I looked at it, it was a vision of Jesus, and he was looking at me sadly. And I looked at him, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. And when suddenly I had an overwhelming feeling that I was in the presence of God. It was so beautiful and euphoric. So immediately I had the suspicion, I don't know what, because I was looking. I'm dumbfounded. I wasn't sure what I was looking at, but I knew I was all awake. And then I had the sense that this figure in front of me was telling me I can do what I wish. I can go with him or I could stay there. And I decided, no, I better not. So I just didn't know what this was all about. Then I went back to sleep. And then later that morning, I got a phone call that my brother had died in Baltimore, 640 miles away from me in Massachusetts. But it was an overwhelming feeling. I guess I waited 50 years to say this, that yes, there is life on the other side. It's definitely there.
What do you think of that, William?
Thank you.
Ray, thank you for sharing that. And I so appreciate that. And, you brought up something that's really important, and that is for some people, a significant religious or spiritual being will appear. We haven't done enough research on this to verify this, but it seems like this is what the NDE research says, and we're just starting to do this research ourselves. It seems like in other, like Asian cultures, that there are more spiritual, identifiable spiritual beings with different religious traditions that appear. But I love your case, Ray, because when you see Jesus appear, that is a sign, obviously, of a high elevated being who's come to, in my estimation, I do see this in the research, to provide comfort and verification that something significant has happened. And, of course, it was verified by your learning that your brother had died. I would love for you, Ray, if you would reach out to my research team at sharedcrossing.com. We'd love to learn more about your experience. But thank you so much for sharing it. And 50 years ago, and you still remember it.
Sure
Sounds
does.
like almost clear as day. That's wonderful.
William, with these shared death experiences, is there a common denominator that keeps popping up that you could talk about?
Well, I think the common denominator is, like I said, the most dominant feature is 51% of the shared death experiencers will see the dying in their transition. They'll see them ascending. They'll see them, moving into the heavenly realms. They'll see them encountering other deceased relatives. Sometimes they'll see them have a life review. They'll see them in the tunnel. They'll see them heading towards the light. Those are the dominant features that let us know that this is an SDE. And by the way, I should say, the overwhelming majority of the people who report these experiences to us have no idea that the SDE exists. They don't know that it's a category of any kind. They don't know it's a trope of any kind. They don't know anything about it. They're coming to us rather, I dare say, humbly, even sheepishly, to say, well, I heard about the SDE. I don't know if I've had it, but here's my experience. That will all change, George, because now that my book is out there, and the word is getting out, and people are really, dialoguing increasingly about the SDE, and they're basically saying, hey, I think I had this experience. I read this book. I had, one of these, and so now our culture is starting to talk about this experience, and I would use the NDE phenomena as an example for how the SDE may evolve in the public consciousness. 50 years ago, Raymond writes, Life After Life about the NDE, and of course, communication was a lot different then, and there wasn't social media. Well, the SDE is really taking off right about now. So I think if we were to talk in a few years, George, this would be a really different conversation because the knowledge about it would be a lot higher.
William, have you ever had anybody with an SDE say he didn't like the experience, that it bothered him?
Just those who have what we call sympathetic SDEs, and that is they experience the somatic, visceral experiences of the dying. So like the example I gave in the first hour here was about somebody who senses that the experience of their dying loved one. So if you have a drug overdose or a heart attack, that's another one we see. People will say, I'm thinking of one case from Mona in our research. She talks about she's in her car, she's in the parking lot, she's about to start her car up, and all of a sudden she has pressure in her chest, she has difficulty breathing, and she literally slumps over the steering wheel, goes unconscious. Then it passes, the pain in her heart diminishes. She goes, wow, it feels like I kind of had a heart attack. She gets a call a few minutes later that her spiritual teacher, who she was about to drive up and visit, just died of a heart attack. That's a sympathetic SDE. You have a strong connection with the person dying, and you experience some of their phenomena as they're crossing over and leaving this life. Those are distressing, especially when they don't understand why they're having that experience.
Exactly. Cynthia's with us, East Hampton, Massachusetts. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi. Yes. I've had near-death experiences about 4 times in my life, but the most recent was not with me, but with my aunt. She had informed her husband that she was passing, and he was angry with her. And the next day she collapsed into a coma. And we all went to the hospital, and I said, praying for her to come or to go. And he said to go. And then I went into a spiritual prayer, and then I started having pulsations like I was having a heart attack. And I said, I got to go. And I prayed all the way home, and I prayed, and an hour and a half later, she passed.
Wow.
And then she came to me, spiritually, she came to me to relay a message to my uncle. I conveyed the message to him, but he wasn't welcoming it at that time. But the next morning, he came to my house. He never went to my house, and he gave me a bouquet of flowers and said, nobody knew what you just told me. It was just between your aunt and me. And so I felt that spiritual connection, and that's the most I can do as far as being an interim in the spiritual realm to the physical realm.
It's a great story, William.
It's a beautiful story. And yes, Cynthia, that is, a kind of shared death experience. How beautiful. And it's wonderful that you were able to share it with other family members, and that in this case, it sounds like this was your uncle that was able to affirm your experience and bring you that bouquet of flowers. That's wonderful when the SDE, and I think the SDE serves this purpose of it's so powerful that it transforms people and it brings people closer together. And I think that is another reason why I think the dying, and this answers a question you were asking me earlier, George, which is the dying, I believe, feel comforted themselves and grateful that their death can bring people together and they can share these profound spiritual experiences.
It's pretty dramatic stuff, isn't it?
Well, I think so, and this is why I've been watching this since this experience was on the margins of our culture and being discounted and dismissed. It's not anymore. People are talking about it, and we're just getting started here, George. I think this is going to change the way people not just look at the way we die in this country, but it's also going to change the way we live, and we're going to start getting really prepared and curious about how we die and do it a lot differently with a lot more mindfulness, preparation, and make it a sacred event that it needs to be.
First-time caller Rob, Youngstown, Ohio. Hey, Robbie, go ahead.
Hi. So I was just first-time caller, and thank you for taking my call. But,
thank you.
So I've never had a near-death experience that I can recall, but I was just wondering, what do you think actually happens when you do pass on to the afterlife? Like, personally, I believe we're all energy. So, you can't destroy it or anything like that. So we wake up to another state of consciousness, something like that.
Well, what's on the other side, William?
Well, Rob just stated the first law of thermodynamics, which is that energy can never be created or destroyed. It can just be transmuted or transformed into a different form. And I think you're on it, Rob. I think that when we go through this experience we call human death, that this core of ourselves, soul, spirit, consciousness, which is energetic, it drops the human body, the physical aspect of itself, and goes into a different form, which is, to use a rather clumsy term, it's a spirit body. But I think the consciousness is still there. This is, I've had a couple dozen SDEs and 2 near-death experiences, and they all have that common dimension or experience that, hey, I'm in a different place, but I'm still here. It's like the I that I identify with, this observing aspect of myself that can sense and feel and observe phenomena around me is still there. Whether I'm in a body or not, I still have a consciousness that I can call, don't know if I'd call it William, but I can certainly say it's a me. And I think that's where, life gets really exciting, because life doesn't die a human death. It just takes on a different form, and you see more phenomena, you experience more of our universe. And I'm quite frankly ecstatic about it, because I think that the SDE shows us the initial dimensions in the afterlife. But there seems to be a lot more beyond that light. And I think and it all feels benevolent and loving and kind. And I don't hear any significant cases in the SDE of hell realms or even purgatory type limbo states. A little bit of that, but nothing in compared to the overwhelming majority of really glorious states of existence.
I was going to ask you, William, I haven't heard you mention the devil.
Don't see that, George. I wish, just because it's such I'd like to see a negative force in the SDE. I have seen forces that are not me personally, but I have had accounts where there was a conductor that was protective and almost fiercely so. And I'll give an example of this, George, because I think this tells us something about the way we die. There was
I'll tell you what, we're coming up to the break, William. We'll do the example when we come back and take final phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. William Peters with us. His book, At Heaven's Door, just came out, so take advantage of it. It's a great read about shared death experiences. And we'll be back with final calls with William Peters, author of At Heaven's Door, in a moment on Coast to Coast AM, so get ready to go. We are back with William Peters, our final segment, and your final calls here on Coast to Coast. William, the break got us, and you were going to cite some example for us.
Yeah, thanks, George. This question you raised, which is common, are there negative or demonic forces that greet us? And we have seen, not a lot, but a few cases where this presence, which I call the conductor, appears. And I'll share one case that's illustrative, because we have a couple like this. A woman shared an example where her mother was on life support, and she'd been on life support for about a week, and the family did not want to let her go, but she was very uncomfortable, and they were keeping her here. Well, this woman is in the room with her mother alone, and she's praying, and this large force appears that she describes as like ominous, imposing, and almost pushing her back a little bit away from the bed. And at first she was scared by this force, but then she realized this force was fiercely protecting her mother, and knew that her mother was vulnerable. And so we have this conductor playing this protective role at times, and sometimes I think they step into the human realm a little bit and use behaviors that we understand as, stand away from the dying. They're vulnerable. I'm here to protect. And that can be a little bit off-putting, a lot off-putting and scary to people. It doesn't happen very much. But what tends to happen, as in this case, was this woman had a shared death experience and then came to be transformed in her understanding of what that being, that conductor, was doing. It was lovingly protecting her mother, just doing it in a fearful way. But as I'm saying this, I'm remembering the description. She said this figure was a female, and it was holding something, but it was huge. She said it was like 4 times the size of a human being. It took up the whole space of the room just to one side of her mother.
Back to the calls we go, west of the Rockies. Gina Maria in Washington State. Hi, Gina. Go ahead.
Hello. Love and peace and healing, and God bless to everyone.
Thank you.
Everything, everywhere first. I have a couple short experiences and then a question. My dog and cat, I'd rescued a cat, and my dog was the protector and kind of guardian of the cat, to protect it from the other cats so that it could come in the room, eat and drink and all that. Well, when the cat was dying, I told the dog that Indigo, she's dying, and my dog kind of wailed, and then we all climbed on the bed, and we were laying there, and after a while, both of them lifted their heads and turned in the opposite direction and looked up in the corner of the ceiling in the room, and were obviously both seeing the white light. And when the cat passed on, the dog obviously was watching this, seeing this, and wailed. And when we did the ceremony for burying the cat, we all, my friends and I, all said our piece. And then I said something, and then I told my dog it was her turn, and she put her paws in the hole on top of the box and wailed. My friends were amazed that, an animal would have that much emotion. And the second thing I wanted to say was when I was adopted at 12 and a half, I had a vision a year later, 13 and a half, and it was my original mom appeared in front of me, and she was hovering, and she was see-through, but you could see her and kind of glowing. And she said to me that she loved me, and she said she was sorry, and she said goodbye. And I didn't find out till a year after that that she had passed away that year before, right when I saw her. And my question was, has he ever heard about that with an animal having a shared experience?
Wow, Gina Maria, what wonderful experiences. And I want to affirm you right away in saying that we hear a great deal about SDEs with pets, dogs and cats, for one. Also, we hear about them, and we have cases now. We're collecting them. So we have them with horses as well. I've learned that, people in the equestrian community in particular, but also, out in kind of areas where people work with horses, there's such strong bonds. So we have SDEs with these animals as well. In fact, we had a case where a woman who had an equestrian organization, basically, and she was in the Caribbean, and in the middle of the night, her favorite horse came to her and said, it was my time, I had to go, and thank you for caring for me. Continue your work caring for all of us in the stable, and I'll see you again later. And she woke up in the middle of the night. She called back to her stable in I think it was in Kentucky, and they said, how did you know we were going to call you when you got up in the morning to tell you that your horse had died? So these experiences happen, and Gina Marie, I want to encourage you and other listeners, if you've had an experience with a pet, please reach out to us at sharedcrossing.com. Go to the contact page. Tell us a bit about your story, and my research team will get in touch with you, because these are very significant events. People are quite close, me included, to our animals and pets, and these experiences need to be honored. I want to say something else, Gina Marie, about it sounds like your birth mother coming to you at 12 and a half, 13 years old. that is a spectacular shared death experience, very evidential. I would love for you to share that with our team if you would be so kind, and how powerful that she came to you, how loving that she said goodbye to you. And it sounds like she even apologized, which is quite humbling and touching. Thank you. These are spectacular examples.
Do shared death experiences happen, William, when you least expect it?
Well, yes. I mean, these are the remote SDEs we talked about, George, which, like I said, about 64% of our cases, almost two-thirds are remote. And they're so powerful when you have a case like Gina Marie's where you're not expecting anything. You don't know anybody who's actually dying, and then you get visited in some way. You have the SDE. It's so profound that you stop what you're doing and you follow up. You make the phone calls. You reach out. You do the emails. Hey, I just had this strange dream about my uncle or dad or so-and-so. Just want to know, is everything okay? And most of the time they find out, oh, my gosh, how did you know so-and-so just died?
Exactly. Next up, let's go to Walter in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Walt.
Hi, George. George, I suppose that philosophically, I think I've said to you, obviously, before that philosophically you could say that life is itself a slow death. So I guess you could say that living is a shared death experience, if you want to call it that. I was telling Gina that this evening we learned about the untimely death of Lisa Marie Presley.
Yeah.
And there were hundreds of people, not thousands, at the Golden Globe Awards with her. And I'm sure that in hindsight, they might say that that she felt that they felt her death coming on. And it's just another uncanny, unexplainable thing in human existence. Now, Georgia, as far as a near-death experience goes, I think that the critical word there is near, because I've used the example of Ted Williams, George. Even if they would thaw out Ted Williams tomorrow, and he were able to come back to life or come out of his state of suspended animation and say that, well, he was in a tunnel where he saw the light, George, to my critical criteria, that couldn't be trusted as coming back from death, because he's in a state of suspended animation. His EEG waves are slowed to such an extent that, but he's not dead, George. You know what I mean?
I thought they just had his head, Walter.
Yeah, they have his body, too, but his head and his body are different receptacles from what I understand.
That's what I hear. And Walt is our resident skeptic there, William, but what do you think of his comments?
Well, I mean, I one of the things that's interesting about this, Lisa Marie Presley is, and you said this here, Walter, that, this notion that maybe these people were having, I don't know if you use this directly, but they had premonitions, perhaps, which is a type of shared crossing experience, not a shared death experience, but a sense that she was dying. And this is something we see in our research quite a bit, is that people have these premonitions, precognitive knowings, if you will, that a loved one will be dying soon, or that they themselves will be dying soon. And I think it's just important to continue to have these conversations, because it normalizes this type of insight, this type of knowledge that, we tend to look at as scant. I mean, the coast-to-coasters, not so much, but as we know, the general public, a little more skeptical. So, yeah, I mean, I like your comments. I like your skepticism here, Walter. But I think if we study this, the more we study the SDE and these other end-of-life phenomena, I think we'll find that they're legit. They're happening at a much higher probability that would be just coincidence. It's very difficult to discount these experiences because the patterns are so profound and so identifiable, and they're happening in minds of people who don't know about these experiences.
Let's go to Charles, truck driving in Elgin, Illinois. Hey, Charles, go ahead.
Hey, how are you guys?
Wonderful. Good to have you with us.
Okay, well, real quick,
January 4th, 2001, my uncle passed away.
Okay.
He always said he would haunt the house that he passed away in. And I ended up with the house, and I see strange stuff happening. How do I send his soul onto the other side? And secondly, my girlfriend passed away a couple days later, January 6th, 2021. And she visited me from the realm she was in. My question is, how could I transcend to that realm to see Earth?
Both interesting questions, William.
Yeah, let's pick up with your girlfriend who died. It sounds to me like your girlfriend, that's a visitation or a vision you had of her. And, you know, one of the ways we distinguish the shared death experience from other end-of-life phenomena is the SDE tends to have this journey aspect in it. It tends to be a movement that the experiencer is observing or sensing, or in some cases, accompanying them through this afterlife, if you will. When you have an experience that I think you're describing here, Charles, that your girlfriend is coming to you and she's appearing to you, and you're having a vision of her, you're not seeing a journey. You're seeing her visiting you stationary, typically delivering a message. You didn't say too much about the message, but in my research, I'll bet she came to you to say, I'm alive and well. Just wanted you to know that. She might have had a specific message for you as well, because that's common. But that's different. And your question about how can you get to where she is, well, boy, that's a tough question. I mean, that's kind of the work of what, you know, a lot of psychics and mediums do. But for you, I think to be increasingly inviting your girlfriend to come and visit you, and to set up a space, you know, a time in your day. Maybe it's before you go to bed, or you do a ritual and you really open yourself. And you don't just do this once. Do this as a practice. Do it day in and, you know, every evening or whenever you feel like you want to do it. I think night's a good time for these because it's right before you get into this dream state where you have this, you get into these hypnopompic states where you can leave your body and have more connection with, departed beings. So those are the practices that I would do to access where your girlfriend is and communicate with her. Really have conversations as if she is there and see what you get back. But do it as a practice. Don't just do it a few nights and say, oh, it's not working. No, do it for a month. And I can assure you, you will get some sort of communication. And if you wouldn't mind, Charles, let me know what you get. Communicate to me at sharedcrossing.com.
Absolutely. William, the book At Heaven's Door, available at Amazon and where else? Any place else?
Pretty much anywhere, you can buy books. It's my publisher, fortunately, is Simon & Schuster, and they have a really good distribution.
They are very good. Thank you, and keep in touch with us. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Gina Salvati, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.